いいピーうるさいひよこたちに挨拶してやろうかな。
加減しろよ。
You Saiyans are like a stubborn virus, and now the virus has mutated to preserve itself. But I know how to treat it. I know how to blot it out for good.
I see the fire in you, brother. You should come with us. It is in your blood. You love to fight.
Hey guys, it's Poohead189, and today we're celebrating Saiyan Day with a deep dive on, you guessed it, the Saiyans. But before that, I want to say that I've gotten requests to do videos on characters. I remember someone asking me to make a video on Boo, and while I will make character videos at some point, I feel like there are so many options on YouTube for character or arc breakdowns, and yet I often see the fans and creators really don't have the fundamentals of the series down before they leap into other subjects. I've noticed that a lot these past few years on Reddit and Twitter, and since I've been a fan of Dragon Ball for about 28 years now, and people are still confused on stuff my friends and I established like back in 2011, I figure I'm in a good position to give you a digestible source of information on the series. But someday I will get to other stuff, and I still take suggestions, of course. But let's do it as sort of like techniques and planets and races and powers and, stuff like that. Now back to the video. Let's do a deep dive on everything to know about the Saiyans. Now, the Saiyans, revealed in chapter 195 of the manga, are an extraterrestrial race of near-humans, and I am using the Star Wars terminology, meaning aliens that look very much like humans, but are still distinctly different from Earthlings. The Saiyans hail from a planet called Vegeta, in the original manga. I am aware that in Super it is said that the Saiyans were from a planet Sadala and moved to planet Plant once Sadala was destroyed from intense infighting and a Super Saiyan's involvement, and that planet Plant became Vegeta. However, we don't really know how the Saiyans got to planet Plant, considering the only explanations we get on Saiyan space travel is either getting technology from the Tuffles or Frieza, and as I am staying with the original manga, I am going with Planet Vegeta in the video. Also, I am as well aware of Toriyama saying Saiyans had space technology before they met King Cold, but in the same interview he also says all Saiyans have trouble studying, and that virtually all their tech was given to them and or replaced when King Cold arrived, so they could not have been very advanced to begin with. In my opinion, it's much cleaner to go with the original manga and cite Planet Vegeta as their origin, or Planet Plant, because I do believe that the Tuffles called it that anyway. But it would be remiss of me to not mention the super canon and the later Toriyama interviews that mentioned Sadala. Either way, it's not my place in the video to say which is or isn't canon, at least not when it's ambiguous. But I want to provide info, and for the sake of this video, if I ever mention the Saiyan home planet, I will call it Vegeta. Now, back to Saiyans. First things first. As everyone likely knows, Saiyan names are derived from vegetable puns. Toriyama's a puntastic guy, and most of his characters were named after food, but for some reason, the Saiyans were connected to vegetables in some form or fashion. Raditz for radish, Kakarot for carrot, Broly for broccoli, so on and so forth. It's very common knowledge, but it would be silly for me to not mention it. Now, let's get into their physiology. Saiyans reproduce the old-fashioned way, though they don't seem to put sexual acts high on their priority list. While most organisms tend to have reproduction as their primary prerogative, Saiyans' primary function is combat, and reproduction is important but still secondary. A big part about humans being able to spread across the world is our drive to make and keep a family, but Saiyans tend to think of that after pursuit of fighting and combat. I've heard people equate fighting to sex for Saiyans, but that's a fundamental misunderstanding. That would be like saying that anything an organism finds important is like sex. You don't get turned on when you breathe or eat because both are important. They are just higher on your priority list than reproduction. And for Saiyans, combat is generally higher on their priority list. It's almost like breathing to them. And the fact that they don't really consider reproduction anything more than secondary would also give credence to the history that the Saiyans are given in the anime when they fought against the Tuffles, and the fact that the Tuffles were technologically superior, and there were also much more of them, and there were only a few Saiyans. But that's just anime canon, but it would sort of go in line with that. Saiyans, though they look like humans, tend to be slightly larger on average. Goku is pretty average of height, but both Nappa and Raditz tower over most characters in the series, and King Vegeta seem to be quite large too. And of course, if we want to, we can count Broly, who is hulking. Paragus seems to be somewhat above average height as well. In fact, Vegeta seems to be the only Saiyan of short stature. Well, I guess if we want to step out of the manga for like the 8th time in the video already, we can count Tarbell, but oh well. And speaking of Saiyan growth, it appears that they both experience and view adulthood differently than we do. For instance, the reason why we tend to think adulthood ranges between the years 16 and 21 in the majority of the world, or 18 to 21 in America, is because that's around the time we as humans stop growing. And so therefore, we are fully grown. However, Saiyans don't see it that way. It's hard to tell at what point a Saiyan becomes an adult to the species at large, but considering infants are thrown to faraway planets alone and are expected to be world conquerors in a matter of a few years, I don't think they really put much stock in someone's drinking age. And from what we can see in the manga, Saiyans do grow far longer than humans. Here's what we can glean on their growth cycle, and Goku is obviously the best example of this. And let's also note that this is just from my viewing of the manga. Toriyama never mentions this, and it's never really talked about, but it seems pretty explicit to me. After infancy, probably around 5 years old, Saiyans only grow a marginal amount for the next decade. Though between the ages of 13 and 15, they do become somewhat taller and somewhat skinnier, but still not by a lot. It's between the ages of 15 and 18 that Saiyans experience a huge growth spurt, suddenly appearing how we might think an adult looks like. Yet it doesn't stop there. Goku and even Vegeta appear to keep growing until they are in their early 30s. Vegeta, though he never really becomes what someone might consider tall, becomes notably taller in the later sagas than at his initial appearance, and Goku experiences the same thing. And of course, you can wave this off and count it as Toriyama's art style changing, but they seem to become taller even in comparison to other characters. In the 23rd tournament, Goku barely reaches Tien's chest and is noticeably shorter than Yamcha, but during the Android arc, it's clear he's almost caught up to Yamcha in height, which means that to Saiyans, adulthood has nothing to do with whether or not their bodies have stopped growing. Nappa does not consider Vegeta a child, for instance, yet Vegeta, who is 30 years old when we meet him, evidently still had a few years to grow, at least if this logic is correct. So I would say a Saiyan probably becomes an adult likely after some sort of rite or accomplishment, rather than a physical milestone. Or maybe they are considered an adult after their first big growth spurt around their 15th to 18th birthdays, but the growing itself, finishing, is not the milestone. And speaking of ages, let's discuss Saiyan lifespans. Toriyama has stated that Saiyans do live longer lives than humans, though they obviously don't live nearly as long as, say, a Namekian, and Saiyans retain their youth longer than a human of comparable age. Nappa is probably the best instance of this. When we first meet Vegeta, like I said, he's about 30 years of age, and Raditz is estimated to be in his mid-30s as well. But compared to his peers, Nappa is fairly old. In fact, unless we go outside of the manga and count someone like Paragus, then at his introduction, Nappa is the oldest remaining Saiyan alive, having been born between the years 703 and 712 in the Dragon Ball calendar, meaning at the time of his death, he was between 50 to 59 years old. And considering Nappa looks like he's in his early 40s, it's pretty interesting to realize he could very easily be 1 year shy of 60 years old without a gray hair on his mustache. And this holds true for both Goku and Vegeta, as they really don't seem to have aged much as the story progresses, while the humans and even half-Saiyans clearly have. But back to their physiology. Let's list a few more ways in which Saiyans differ from Earthlings. Their heightened sense of smell is one, and though yes, eventually the manga stops mentioning that as a trait, it's most likely due to Goku and the gang now being able to sense ki rather than Toriyama forgetting about it. Though of course, you could make that argument of him forgetting about it. But a Saiyan's nose, used from an in-universe standpoint, is likely to help them find food to retain their strength. Saiyans need an incredible amount of food in order to sustain their powerful and usually large bodies. Goku once ate 57 full-course meals after his exertion at the 21st World Martial Arts Tournament, costing Roshi almost all of the earnings he won as Jackie Chun. And both Goku and Vegeta are seen eating vast amounts of food later on in the series. The anime does a good job of showcasing Raditz having the same diet, and it also appears that Saiyan stomachs are extremely durable. In fact, Toriyama mentions this in an interview. Able to digest all kinds of foreign bacteria and organic matter. Nappa and Vegeta being seen eating the inhabitants of the world they conquered as a normal meal would definitely indicate this. Another big difference to humans, in fact likely the most notable aspect of the Saiyan anatomy, is their tail. Curiously, every Saiyan has black hair apparently, but the hair on their tails are always brown. We'll talk about their tail's importance a bit later on, but the tail looks to be treated with much like any tail. A Saiyan can control it well enough, almost like a fifth limb, and they can even be used as weapons as Raditz used with Krillin, or as tools like how Goku would utilize it as a child. Yet if you have sufficient strength and squeeze a tail, it can cause a Saiyan great pain and can easily paralyze them unless they have sufficiently trained their tails out of that sort of weakness. Tails are also able to grow back, but only once. A Saiyan only has 2 tails in their lifetime, the one they were born with and another that can grow back if need be. After that, it appears like they are gone for good. Saiyans also have an inherent toughness to them. And by that I don't mean they're just strong. I mean that Saiyans are notably tough, even compared to people of comparable strength. As a child, Goku's main attribute was how he could get up after receiving punishment that should have kept him down. Even his enemies or friends that knew full well Goku's strength always marveled that Goku kept getting up, and Toriyama kept this in mind. When Goku comes back from King Kai's and he begins to beat up Nappa, Goku explicitly states that Nappa is unbelievably tough after Nappa keeps getting back up. And even in the Japanese version of the manga, Goku uses the word that indicates toughness and not power or strength. And following that, I think anyone with any sense can tell that Vegeta survives far more punishment during the ensuing fight than he really had any right to. Goku overpowers him and pummels him with both the triple and then 4 times Kaioken, and he just keeps getting back up. Then Vegeta tussles with Gohan, only to then be hit head-on by the Spirit Bomb, and he still keeps getting up. It takes being crushed by Ozaru Gohan and Krillin piercing his armor with the Yajirobe sword to even make him think he needs to run away. And of course, Goku being squeezed by Ozaru Vegeta, it's amazing he wasn't crushed into a pulp. And that's not even mentioning the beatings Goku and Vegeta face when fighting later on in the series, from Zarbon and the Ginyu Force, to Frieza, to Cell, to Buu. In fact, I'd say it's almost impossible to actually beat a Saiyan to death. It seems the best way to kill a Saiyan is to either obliterate them after they've been weakened, or impaling them, like Raditz and Goku, and then later when Frieza fires his death beam through Vegeta. And of course, even that might not be enough, like when Piccolo found out in the finals when he fought Goku. And lastly, at least when it comes to their physiology, a brief note on Saiyan hair. It appears Saiyan hair is not only durable, but it remains the same throughout their lifespan. They are born with the hair they have, and they will never require a haircut, though it's difficult to tell just how much of Raditz's hair was the same when he was born, and we don't know if Nappa's hair fell out or if he shaved it off, though I have seen a claim, made by a few sources, that say that Nappa's head is shaved, as apparently in Spain, there was a Dragon Ball magazine that did a 50-issue series published in 2008, and Toriyama did exclusive interviews for the magazine, and at one point cited that Nappa shaved his head. But as I don't have the magazine myself, I won't say that's a hard fact. Facial hair also seems to be pretty contradictory, as we never see Goku needing to shave until Super, and we never see Vegeta or anyone else shaving really, but only Nappa has facial hair in the original manga. Hard to say really. Now, let's get into something that is pivotal in understanding the Saiyans as a whole, likely even more than their alien bodies, and that is their alien psychology. We're all fans of media here. Obviously Dragon Ball media in this instance, and as fans we are pretty obsessed with judging characters by their actions and talking about who did what and who deserves X or Y. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but when it comes to Saiyans, it's wrong to look at them through the lens of a modern-day human. I spoke about this a bit in the video I made on the Super Saiyan and its subforms, so go check that out if you're curious. But I'm going to go as deep as we can into this topic here. Let's get down to it. Saiyan minds are not built entirely like ours. The greatest and easiest example of this is Goku before he hit his head as a baby. He acted aggressive and even dangerous, with far more energy and awareness, and with less conscience than most small children. And even after he hit his head, everyone around him always considered him odd, and he was odd. Even after being exposed to the modern world, he was never bothered by what most other people tended to fret over. He was obsessed with fighting and eating and finding new feats of strength. He had this single-mindedness and lack of care for conventional needs except for what he needed in order to align with his goals, almost like a hound. And while Goku clearly cared for his friends, he saw dangerous situations, even ones his friends were in, as less serious than his peers, or at least often enough. And this is showcased excellently with the three Saiyans, Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta. When Raditz died, Nappa and Vegeta, who, as far as they knew, were some of the last Saiyans in the universe, took only a moment to acknowledge that's a bummer, and then shrugged it off. And yet Raditz did not feel like his comrades were particularly untrustworthy. The same thing with Nappa, when Goku broke his back. He really did not think that Vegeta was a traitor to him at that moment, yet he had known Vegeta pretty much all of his life, or at least Vegeta's life. The best way to describe it is like a wolf pack. A wolf pack, by necessity and familiarity, travel together, and yet when one of the wolves falls behind or is maimed during winter, the other wolves will not spend much energy helping their comrade unless it increases the survivability of the whole pack. Nappa and Vegeta got along very well, and yet when Nappa's back was shattered, Vegeta knew Nappa would only be dead weight from then on and so eliminated him. It appears that, as an evolutionary trait, Saiyans have less capacity for empathy than a modern Earthling would. And that's not to say that Saiyans are more evil, but it connects very well with a species that evolved to make combat and strength the main goal of their life, and it made them perfect planet conquerors. If you were born to compete, fight, and kill to survive, then thinking that life is sacred would be antithetical to your very evolution. And so, Saiyans will fight together and experience camaraderie and kinship, but losing one of their own is not a big deal, even at the brink of extinction. It was extremely interesting when Raditz came to Earth, because he acted exactly as a Saiyan would. His goal was to collect his brother, and so he did that without deviating from that goal. Not only did he let Piccolo live when his scouter caught Goku's energy signature, but when he landed, it was almost like a wolf meeting a domesticated dog while a bunch of house cats watched. It just so happened that the bigger, stronger wolf was not particularly hungry at that moment. If it had been Frieza, or any of his lackeys, and Goku refused them, they would have killed Bulma, Roshi, Krillin, Turtle, and would blown up Kame House just for the evil. But Raditz not only did not do that to the others, he even answered their questions. They really just did not matter to him. While Saiyans love combat and destruction, he had a mission to do, and no one else there was strong enough to be either sport or a threat, so he just did not care. But at the same time, he also did not hesitate to steal Gohan, tell Goku to kill 100 humans, and that, if need be, he'll even kill his own brother. The brother thing is actually pretty enlightening. It's hard to imagine that Vegeta, Nappa, and Raditz needed Goku in order to help conquer a planet, considering how weak Goku was at the time. So it could be that the claim was a front to get another Saiyan in their group, but keep in mind, Raditz had no idea how strong Goku would be when he met him. Yes, it was likely Goku was weaker, considering Earth was supposedly a fairly weak planet, and Raditz was older, but Raditz seemed to be perfectly okay arriving on a planet and finding Goku to be stronger than him, and he still expected Goku to come with him because of the Saiyan kinship. Yet at the same time, Raditz cared less than any normal brother would because he never bothered to get Goku at any other time the past 2 decades, and when Goku pushed him, Raditz was prepared to kill him. And let's get to Vegeta. While it's true that Vegeta is a bit more cruel than the average Saiyan, considering it was Vegeta that shot down the suggestion to wish Raditz back, and Vegeta killed Nappa in a very ruthless fashion, he did not even make it a painless death or gave Nappa a send-off with "you fought honorably." He just kind of ended him. And I am the first person in the fandom to shit on Vegeta and all the mistakes and horrible decisions he's made, without feeling remorse for decades on end. Yet, you can't put the entirety of his actions on him. Just like how Goku sometimes puts others at risk for a good fight, Vegeta's callousness seems to partially be just because the fact that he has a Saiyan brain hardwired to be like that. And the manga seems to support this. Okay, now that we have established Saiyans are inherently different to humans in their emotions and in their manner of thinking, let's get into the Saiyan capabilities of combat. Saiyans have 4 aspects that make them incredibly dangerous opponents to fight. Firstly, Saiyans have natural strength, endurance, and ki control. They require very little training in order to fly, wreak destruction with their ki, and have bodies of superhuman ability. Now, that also sort of makes them a bit lazy in some ways. Earthling warriors and even Namekians spend a lot of time mastering the martial arts, whereas Saiyans are natural warriors, and so they really don't try and polish their moves beyond a few key exceptions. But as I said, oftentimes they don't really need to. Secondly is their planet's gravity. Planet Vegeta is now destroyed, but for the longest time, the high gravity on the planet helped them increase their strength more quickly, and it was likely the reason behind their inherent toughness as well, in order to better survive such harsh conditions. Next is an extremely important part of their ability to fight, and that is what we call the Zenkai, or the Saiyan Power Boost. Saiyans have the natural ability to get stronger after being defeated, in a sort of fast-acting adaptability to survive. Oftentimes, the Zenkai is just enough to defeat the enemy that just defeated the Saiyan, so the body appears to naturally remember the strength of the opponent that beat it, and evolves in order to overcome that same obstacle later. Of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes Zenkais vary wildly, but that could also be due to other factors, like prior training, or length of healing, or the amount one was beaten, and it also seems that Zenkais are muted when a Super Saiyan experiences defeat. Usually if a Super Saiyan is beaten, the Saiyan will need to still train in order to surpass whatever enemy defeated them, so it appears that Zenkais only work in base form. Though of course, another great explanation is that Toriyama just forgot about the Zenkai Power Boost once the Super Saiyan started showing up, but we do see Perfect Cell get a Zenkai boost after he returns as Super Perfect Cell, which means at least for a minute there, Toriyama was thinking about it. And the theory that a Super Saiyan cannot experience it would also explain why Future Trunks and Future Gohan did not increase their powers exponentially in their timeline, because it was suicide to fight the androids without transforming, and so they were unable to get Zenkais throughout their battles. And finally, the fourth and very important aspect of Saiyan combat strength is the Ozaru Form. In order to achieve this form, a Saiyan needs to have a tail, either their original or the second one that grew back. Following that, the Saiyan needs a full moon to be in sight. One can also potentially create a ball that replicates the moon, or the light that radiates off of it. In the anime dub, it's called Blunt's Waves, but in the manga, they're called Zenos, at least I believe in the Viz. But either way, it is a form of energy that awakens a Saiyan's primal state and allows them to transform. Once they do, they grow rapidly into a giant ape, with an almost dog-like head. The form is generally around 50 to 70 feet tall, but art makes it fluctuate. In this form, a Saiyan's strength is increased by a multiplier of 10, though apparently their speed does not increase. If a Saiyan is untrained, they will lose all sense of themselves and destroy everything around them. However, an elite Saiyan, better trained in that form, can control it, and loses no part of their mind. Now let's discuss Saiyan society and hierarchy. Anyone who's read or watched any version of the series knows about the Saiyan class system. There are low-class warriors like Goku and Raditz, and there are upper-class warriors like Vegeta and Nappa, and clearly the class system is based on the power of the individual Saiyan. But it's also not that simple. It seems that it is extremely rare for a low-class warrior to become an upper-class warrior, which is one reason why Nappa and Vegeta are so put off when Goku begins to beat them. It's almost like they're offended that he's stepping out of his lane. And it also appears that a Saiyan's birth and heritage play a big part in a Saiyan's inherent power. In the manga, after Goku kicks Nappa into a boulder, Nappa pops back up and starts screaming at Goku about how Nappa is an elite warrior from a prestigious clan, and he says he will not be beaten by a low-class warrior like Goku. We can glean a few key facts from this. Firstly, Nappa is from a clan, but we already know Saiyan clans are not like Namekian clans, as Namekian clans dictate a Namekian's role in society, whereas Saiyan society is dictated by strength and bloodline. So a prestigious clan would be a Saiyan clan that consistently births strong warriors, and Nappa says he is an elite warrior even for that clan. I've also heard that Nappa was the general of the whole Saiyan army, but I could not find a manga line or interview line confirming this. However, it would not be far-fetched to think he would be something very close to a commander. In an interview, Toriyama states that the vast majority of Saiyans are lower-class warriors, and then there are 10 middle-class warriors, and then the elites are comprised of only Vegeta and King Vegeta. He states that Bardock was in the upper tier of lower class, and we can only assume that Nappa was one of the 10 in the mid-tier. And so this sounds very much like the traditional Japanese feudal society. You have the commoners, with Raditz, Goku, and Bardock, and then you have the nobility or daimyo, in Japan, like Nappa, and then you have the shogun and his family, like Vegeta and his father. I would also be remiss if I did not mention a pretty popular theory, or at least a fan theory over the years on lower-class warriors. There is no interview by Toriyama that I know of, or anything in the manga that supports this, but a lot of people have theorized that lower-class warriors tend to have only a small number of appearances and do not vary in looks often, almost like a limited video game character selector, where you have like 5 looks and one of them just happens to look like Goku. Again, there is nothing to prove this, but people brought it up because of just how similar Goku looks to Bardock, and young Goten looks to Goku, and Goku Jr. and GT looks like all of them, and of course the mere existence of Turles. It's a neat fan theory, but make of it as you will. And now that we have established the class system, let's discuss Saiyan power levels. Vegeta is clearly the strongest when he is first introduced, with an extremely high power level of 18,000, according to the Daizenshu. Raditz, a lower-class warrior, is only 1,200, being a lower-class warrior, as I just said, and he is also described as being pretty weak by Saiyan standards. Though I do need to point out that though Raditz is confirmed lower-class and fairly weak, he is also called an upper-level warrior by Toriyama during an interview, and at first this seems like a very big contradiction. However, the difference between Raditz and other lower-class Saiyans like Goku, he was never sent off as a baby to destroy a world. In Dragon Ball Minus, he already had a battle group as a younger Saiyan, which means while he is lower class, he was probably born with sufficient strength to be seen as valuable enough to keep close by. And this brings us right back to some talk on Saiyan psychology, because when we see Raditz in the series, he doesn't have as much of a gung-ho nature as the other Saiyans we see. Even when overwhelmed or near death, Goku, Nappa, and Vegeta tend to fight back even harder, or they refuse to give up. Yet in the case of Raditz, he stoops to lying and deceit, and sees a threat for what a human would see it, as a threat. And while I would not consider Raditz a coward by any stretch, as he smiles at his own death and goads Piccolo to finish him off, and since it's only stupid to tell someone with a loaded gun to do their worst, he probably was a coward by Saiyan standards, which, on the one hand, keeps him alive, but on the other hand, also means he takes less risks, which means he has less opportunities for Zenkais, which means that while Raditz was probably born with a power level exceeding a lot of other lower-class warriors, he sort of stunted his own growth by being more careful than his peers. Also, he might have been considered an upper-level warrior because he seems to have some good skill in close combat, as the manga portrays him moving a bit more deftly than Nappa or Vegeta, which would coincide with his more cunning nature. Raditz was probably a very good fighter, just not nearly as strong as the other Saiyans. But let's get into a more complicated subject, which is Nappa's power level. According to the Daizenshu 7, Nappa has a power level of 4,000, which is nothing to look down on at the time, but it doesn't seem to match up with what we see in the manga. From what we see in the battle between Goku and Piccolo versus Raditz, Piccolo increases his power level by about a factor of 4 with his special beam cannon, and Goku more than doubles his strength when he powers up with a Kamehameha. Fast forward to when Nappa and Vegeta arrive, Krillin has a power level, I think, of around 1770, and Ten Shinhan has a power level of about 1830. Piccolo, according to the Daizenshu 7, has a power level of 3500, which means it should have been relatively easy for any of these guys, when working together, to summon up enough power to beat Nappa without Goku's help. If Piccolo quadrupled his power with the Special Beam Cannon earlier, then there should be no reason he could not at least double it when he's firing at Nappa, even with a more mundane attack. Ten Shinhan, though he was probably a bit weaker than his full power when he fired it because, he was beaten up and he lost his arm, he used the Kikoho or Tri-Beam to attack Nappa, and unless you want to make the argument that the attack missed, then someone with a 4000 power surviving that, even someone with a Saiyan's toughness, is pretty unbelievable. And of course, when Goku arrives, his power is 5,000, and when he really gets going, his power level is over 8,000. And even at full power, Goku says that fighting Nappa could take forever, and Nappa does keep pace with him. So it's honestly illogical to think that Goku, who apparently now is twice Nappa's strength, would have trouble fighting Nappa. So in this instance, in mine and many other people's opinions, the Daizenshu is incorrect. I won't fault you for leaning on it because I do often, but it seems very illogical, and it's much more likely that Nappa's strength is closer actually to about 7,000, maybe even 7,500. And so with all these power levels put together, let's judge normal Saiyan strength. Actually, let's estimate Bardock's strength. How about that? Okay, Raditz is a weak, low-class warrior at about 1,200. Nappa was an elite fighter of the nobility class at the center of the pyramid, at a power level we'll estimate is around 7,500. Vegeta's power is from royal blood, and he is truly an elite and has an 18,000 power level. In the Bardock movie, Bardock is said to have a power level of around 10,000, which was near King Vegeta's strength, apparently. And in the movie, a lot of low-class warriors were now growing exponentially stronger, and Bardock was stronger than most, which is one reason why Frieza was getting scared, because a lot of them were becoming stronger very quickly. But let's disregard the movie, though, and try to go with more accurate reading that's not in the non-canon special. If Raditz is weaker lower class, that means Bardock's strength would be far above his. And if Nappa is around 7 to 7,500, and he is the upper echelons of middle class, then we can surmise the middle class probably fluctuates between, let's say, 6 to 8,000. And if that's the case, then it actually seems fitting that Bardock was probably as strong as Goku when he first showed up, before he powered up, at around 5,000. So I would estimate that the majority of Saiyan power levels were probably between 2 to 4,000, if I had to guess, with a good amount of better warriors reaching 5,000 before they were stepping into the territory of the noble clans, which would mean the average Saiyan was similar in strength to the average Dragon Clan member of the Namekians. There was probably a fair bit of Saiyans who were stronger, and of course a few who were weaker, like Raditz. Okay, I think this video has gone on long enough. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and before I go, I'd like to give 2 shoutouts. I pretty much do like 98% of everything in these videos. I write the script, I voice everything, I edit it all, but sometimes I have some help. I'm in a very small group chat that has been going on for about 15 years at this point, and for the majority of the chat's history, we've mostly talked about Dragon Ball, and that's how we all met, too. And I want to give a shout out to 2 people in there. Firstly, I want to give a shout out to a good friend of mine called Dave, who has been a longtime fan of the series and has studied Japanese for many years at this point. He's far better than I am at Japanese. And if I ever need a manga panel translated, he does it quickly, accurately, and without complaint. So, thanks, Dave. And also my good friend Clearin. Now, I've read the manga plenty, but I would not doubt that he's read it even more than I have. And if I'm ever at work, and if I'm unsure of a panel or something, I'll ask about it in chat, and he always manages to know or find what I am curious on within usually a few minutes. So shout out to Clearin too. Alright everyone, again, I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. Liking, commenting, and subscribing always helps the algorithm, so I'd definitely appreciate it if you think I deserve it at least, and I hope you all have a wonderful Saiyan day. Thanks.